The Economist.
Hello, and welcome to The Intelligence from The Economist. For one last time, I'm Ore Ogunbiyi.
Oh, and I'm Jason Palmer. Every weekday, we provide a fresh perspective on the events shaping your world.
If early results are an indicator of what's to come, South Africa's ruling party, the ANC, is about to lose its majority, the party's worst electoral performance in 3 decades. If they have to form a coalition, will they choose pragmatism or populism?
And keen-eared listeners to the show already know the big news. Our beloved Ore is leaving. Don't worry, she'll still appear on the show, just doing less of the question stuff and more of the answer stuff. We're going to have a little chat about the job that awaits. But first, Donald Trump has provided America with many presidential firsts. And yesterday, he bequeathed the country another.
And Sumi, I can just tell you, Donald Trump has been found guilty on count 1. Donald Trump, the first former president to be convicted in a criminal trial.
But that was just the beginning. This first was made up of 34 scandalous parts.
From our producer inside, we're hearing guilty on 1 through 5.
Count 6, guilty. Count 7, guilty.
This jury in New York City, a jury of his peers finding the former president guilty on every single felony count brought against him by the Manhattan.
I don't have to keep using the word allegedly. Mr. Trump has been convicted on 34 counts of falsifying business records, a string of misdemeanors made into felonies through a complicated legal argument. It's just the first of 4 felony cases he has on his packed agenda, but it's likely to be the only one to conclude before November's election. For 7 weeks, Kenneth Werner has been following this trial for us, right up to its somewhat sudden conclusion.
Well, first of all, we didn't think that we were going to get a conviction. I mean, this was the second day of jury deliberations. It was at the very end, and the judge said, I'm about to send the jurors home, and they'll come back for a third day on Friday. But right before he was about to do it, the jury said, actually, we're about to come to a verdict. Give us 30 more minutes to fill out the form. So we were all waiting there. I mean, huge anticipation in this room. It was so tense. The jury then files back in, and the jury foreman reads out 34 times guilty. And I mean, it was just the sense in the room that history was being made. It was really pretty stunning. Trump then gets up and he walks out of the courtroom looking incredibly angry. Normally, Trump has, you could call it a kind of orange glow about him. And this time he was totally red in the face. The question now is, what does this mean for his campaign? How much does it hurt?
Okay, Kenneth, before we get to what it means, just sketch out maybe one last time what this case was about.
The case goes back to 2016, during Trump's first run for office. Before the election, his personal lawyer at the time, a guy named Michael Cohen, paid Stormy Daniels, a porn star, $130,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement. She said that back in 2006, she had sex with Donald Trump, and Cohen was paying her to keep quiet about it. Donald Trump, after the election, then paid Cohen back, and he did it in a series of installments, and he marked the reimbursement to Cohen as payment for legal services in his company account books. Prosecutors said that these were false business records, and they charged him with that felony. And throughout the trial, Trump denied all of it.
But those denials, whatever Mr. Trump's lawyers gave as a defense, clearly didn't cut it.
Trump's lawyers made some really implausible claims at the trial. They said first that Trump had never slept with Stormy Daniels in 2006. They said that Michael Cohen paid her of his own volition. Trump hadn't ordered him to pay it. And that other executives at the Trump organization dealt with the payment to Michael Cohen, and that Trump at this point was president and he was too busy and he had no knowledge of how Michael Cohen was being paid. In addition to these rather implausible arguments, there was a lot of testimony at the trial that made Trump seem like a real sleaze, frankly. Witnesses described how he wouldn't use email because he was worried that it could be incriminating. The combination of all this stuff, the impossible arguments, and then just the muck of the case really, I think, stuck with jurors and led to this conviction.
Right. And talk me through Mr. Trump's reaction to this conviction.
After Trump left the courtroom in the hallway, he attacked the judge, he attacked the prosecutors, and the whole trial. He said the whole thing was rigged. And he's done that for weeks since the indictment was announced, actually, last year.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here.
He falsely accused Joe Biden of being behind this indictment.
This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent.
So what do we know about the wound, the hurt, at least as regards to the judicial system? Like, is Mr. Trump at any risk of going to prison?
So he's probably not going to go to prison. I mean, these are really low-level felonies. He's a first-time felon. Sentencing will come on July 11th. That will be done by the judge in this case. Trump is obviously going to appeal against this verdict. And even if in the very, very off chance that the judge sentenced Trump to prison, that sentence probably wouldn't start until the appeals have been exhausted. And that appeal process will take years to play out.
And in the meantime, there's going to be something of a consequential election, right? What about the political hurt or wounds? Are there any? Or will this, in a way we've seen many times before, actually help him?
There will be independents who will say they can't vote for a convicted felon. The Biden campaign sent out an email right after the verdict was announced urging people to vote. So they're hoping that people will be turned off by this. But there are a lot of reasons to think that the damage will be limited and Trump could weather this. The trial was really salacious. There was a lot of embarrassing testimony. But Americans have heard all of this before. What was being discussed at this trial has been public since 2018, and it certainly hasn't hurt Trump yet. When the indictment first came down a year ago, his poll numbers actually rose. After the verdict, he sent out a fundraising email saying that he was a political prisoner, come vote for me. So this is very much part of his narrative, that he's the victim of a witch hunt. The other reason to think that the damage from this verdict will be limited is the fact that it was quite a confusing case. The legal argument used by the prosecutors to advance their case was very convoluted, because to charge someone with falsifying business records, that would be a misdemeanor. So in order to do it as a felony, prosecutors have to show that the records were falsified to commit or conceal another crime. And so in this case, the prosecutors said the other crime was this state law that makes it a crime to conspire to influence an election through unlawful means. And then they posited 3 unlawful means. They said that the hush money was a campaign finance violation, that it was an undeclared contribution to Trump's campaign, essentially, that the reimbursement to Michael Cohen wasn't properly reported for tax purposes, and that other business records had been falsified in order to pay the hush money. So because the case is so complicated, it offers the defense a lot of opportunities to poke holes in the legal argument and to seek a reversal of the conviction.
Okay, but looking at this in the round, voters have heard all this before. He's actually benefited from this narrative. You would say, despite this history-making label of president felon, he's in an all right position.
Believe it or not, he's actually in a pretty decent position if you think about all of the legal jeopardy that he faces. So he's a defendant in 3 other criminal cases. 2 are at the federal level, and another one is a state case, and that's in Georgia. If he wins the election in November, and right now he leads the polls, he'll be able, as head of the Justice Department, to drop the 2 federal cases against him. The other state case probably wouldn't go forward either while he's in office. So that leaves this case, which is a pretty minor case, as the only kind of legal accountability that he'll face, certainly before the 2024 election. And then if he wins that election, probably for a very long time.
Kenneth, thanks as always for your time, and I guess I'd say talk to you for the next one.
Thanks for having me.
Millions of South Africans have been voting this week in what may be the most consequential election since Nelson Mandela came to power. For 3 decades, the African National Congress, or the ANC, has dominated politics in the country, winning convincing majorities in every vote since the end of apartheid in 1994. But this time around, things are a little more competitive.
The most defining change in a generation could come in South Africa.
So the governing African National Congress are short of the 50% vote share.
If this continues, would be the first time that the ANC does not get this majority.
In fact, as early results stream in, the outcome may be far worse for the ANC than the party expected.
There's been a momentous result in South Africa's election.
John McDermott is our chief Africa correspondent.
The African National Congress, a colossus of African politics, the continent's oldest liberation movement, is set to lose its national majority for the first time since the end of white rule in 1994. And that means the next few weeks are going to be a fascinating time here in the Rainbow Nation.
Okay, so let's dive into the numbers. What exactly are the early results showing?
We're still getting results in. I don't think counting will be finished until the weekend, but early results and initial projections suggest that the ANC could be as low as 42%. And that would be a precipitous fall from what it got the last time in 2019, which was 57.5%. And it is a hammer blow to the ruling party, and one that will have kind of huge ramifications for politics here. There's a million reasons why the ANC has done that badly related to the state of the country. But in electoral terms, the big wow factor has been the ascendance of Umkhonto we Sizwe, a party cheekily named after the ANC's old arm wing, but led by Jacob Zuma, the former president, which only really got going late last year, but looks set to become, out of nowhere, the third largest party.
And if the vote tally continues in line with the early results, what will that mean for the ANC?
The main consequence is that it will lose the parliamentary majority it has had since 1994. South Africa has a president, but also a parliamentary system. So once the results are formalised, the political class has about 2 weeks to come to Parliament and vote for a new president who then forms a government. And that will all be nice and formalised, at least in theory. But in reality, Ori, you're going to see some of the most epic backroom politicking over the next fortnight. And essentially what will happen is the ANC will look to try and do what deal it can to remain in power, albeit at the head of a coalition rather than on its own. And depending exactly how badly it does, that will determine which of the parties from the constellation of options it will look to do a deal with first.
And so which parties might it team up with?
There's a lot of parties in South Africa, but essentially the path ahead has two possible destinations. One is pragmatism. And that would mean, in essence, a deal between the ANC and the main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, which looks to have won about 22% of the vote. And the DA, as it's known, is a liberal centrist party, has a stronghold in and around Cape Town. And if it were to be an ANC-DA tie-up, I think that would be overall pretty good news for the country. You would probably see some more sensible, pragmatic policies. The alternative to pragmatism is populism. And that would mean the ANC doing a deal with one or both of the populist offshoots from the ruling party. So we've talked about Umkhonto we Sizwe, but there's another party called the Economic Freedom Fighters, which is led by former ANC youth leader, and it seems to be getting just under 10% of the vote on current projections. Now, there are some in the ANC that quite like that idea. It would bring the family back together as they see it, but it would also frighten a lot of markets because both of these parties are hard left on economics and kind of ethno-nationalist in kind of social politics.
John, what does all this mean for the current president, Cyril Ramaphosa?
It means a big headache. Mr. Ramaphosa, who negotiated the end to white rule in the early 1990s, is now looking at having to negotiate the end of the ANC hegemony. Going into the election, he hoped to either eke out a majority or to get close enough to 50% that the ANC could do a deal with a few minor parties. There's still an outside chance of that happening, but it looks vanishingly small as I talk to you now. And That means he will have trouble getting a deal together, but he's also going to have trouble within his own party. He can't stand for another term as president after 2029, and he will probably be succeeded as party leader in a few years' time as well. And the ANC has a history of defenestrating leaders because of factional battles or poor electoral performances. So it's looking like a pretty tragic career ending for Mr. Ramaphosa, who came to power with such great hope, pledging a new dawn after all the corruption and economic stagnation under Mr. Zuma.
And if South Africa does end up with some form of a coalition, could that work in the country's favour?
It depends on the coalition. And I think Mr. Ramaphosa now has a chance to finally put country before party, because putting the ANC first has been at the root of a lot of his problems and probably his electoral failure right now. If the ANC required a coalition with a larger party, it would be much better for the country if it went into power with the DA, which, for all its failures, runs the local governments it operates pretty well and would bring a level of competence to the government. And, South Africa still has a lot of strengths, and getting some of the basics right in administration would actually go a long way. So you can see a world in which moderates in the ANC come together with the DA, and actually South Africa does pretty well over the next few years. But right now, that outcome is far from a guarantee. Exactly what Mr. Ramaphosa will do will depend both on the precise election results and also what's going on within the African National Congress. And now, as this giant of African politics has stumbled, who knows which way it will fall.
John, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Ori.
Okay, we find ourselves here in the studio in what feels like a kind of morose moment. You've been trailing all week that this is your last week on the show. In a nutshell, how's the last year been for you?
I think the last year has been the most invigorating challenge. It's very weird having people recognize your voice, but also kind of know nothing about you. Like, people say they listen to me every day. That is very weird. Early mornings are not always fun, but yeah, a little bit sad to be leaving, but it's been really good fun.
So, okay, you've hit the groove. Why would you then leave?
So I've got this exciting, incredible new job. I'm going to be an Africa correspondent for The Economist, which I'm super excited about. It is a literal dream role. I'm going to be living in Lagos, reporting on all things from the continent. So business, innovation, society and culture, probably a bit of economics too. I mean, we are The Economist after all.
But you are not going to leave us behind. As you go and you explore from your perch, you are going to remember to gather audio for us, right?
Obviously, it's not a goodbye, it's a see you later. I will be still on the show, but just from Lagos and bringing lots of content, bringing the stories that matter to the show as per. So obviously, stay tuned in for the good stuff.
And you actually just got back from Lagos doing some reporting already.
Yeah, we've kind of started early, I guess, Keen Bean, all of that. Tomorrow on The Weekend Intelligence, you'll be able to hear my first dispatch from Lagos. It's a story about my home city of Lagos and these twin crises that it faced. So a housing crisis and an environmental one, because coastal erosion is a very real thing and it's kind of in trouble because it's a very low-lying city. And so we basically go on a little trip down the coast. It's not a nice walk along the beach as you might imagine. It's actually quite a worrying, I would say, alarming picture of a city that is too important to sink, but is sinking regardless.
So, high points, favorite stories, favorite moments, things you wish you could forget?
I think it's pretty impressive that I managed to get my mother on the show twice. I mean, I think another high point for me was Birkenstocks. Finding out that some people in this office don't even know what Birkenstocks are. Like, hello? Have you been living under a rock? Anyway, I think some other high points though. We got to go on lots of great trips, tasting ketchup-flavoured ice cream. The other day we went to play bowls and I managed to beat our producer who claimed he was something of an expert, but apparently not. There have been lots of great segments, to be honest. I'm obviously picking the ones that I remember the most, but I'm going to miss all of it, really. I'm going to miss all the time in the studio, even the early mornings. I might miss some of those. But no, I'm leaving you all in great hands, and I think that my successor, who you're going to meet soon, is going to be fabulous. And I trust that Jason will be nice to her, and she's going to be great.
All right. One last time for old time's sake. It's a Friday, so you know what happens on Fridays. Do the thing.
Thanks, Jason. It's really been a pleasure. That's all for this episode of The Intelligence. The show's editors are Chris Impey and Jack Gill. Our deputy editor is John Joe Devlin, and our sound designer is Will Rowe, with assistance this week from Saul Rivers. Our senior producers are Rory Galloway and Sarah Larniak. Our senior creative producer is William Warren. Our producers are Maggie Kadifa and Benji Guy. And our assistant producer is Henrietta McFarlane, with extra production help this week from Emily Elias, Jonathan Day, and Peter Granitz. We'll all see you back here tomorrow for the Weekend Intelligence. Bye for now.